Peter Myers, welcome back to see you on the show. Delighted to have you here again today to talk to us about consulting, governance, and great leadership ideas in the credit union movement.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Looking forward to it. It's been too long.
It has. Well, your popularity is the issue. I'm here all the time.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I think what we're going to talk about is an important topic in the industry, CEO, oversight, management of the CEO. What are some of the governance practices? I think it's long overdue for some organizations to really dive into this content.
So you should be aware, Peter, that my listeners are generally CEOs
Yeah.
and other senior executives. So are you saying that this session is for the board? What we're
No, I'm
about?
saying this session is for the board and CEO. I'll tell you that the highest performing CEOs love this methodology. And
Okay.
I'll tell you a couple of reasons why in a few minutes. But if you're not looking to be in a stronger accountability conversation with your board, like put some really clear guardrails around rewarding, performance evaluations, etc., that I wouldn't be in this conversation. But when this conversation happens, it brings board and CEOs together closer than they ever are throughout the whole year is through this process.
So before we even start, then, is the best practice, if you're a CEO and you're listening to this conversation and it resonates for you, do you share this with your board chair? Is that
Yeah,
what?
absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
very good.
Board chair, governance committee, and CEO. And then I think this is also a good conversation for those aspiring CEOs or those in the waiting wing, because they can start to go, oh, this is what I can maybe expect and or request when I'm interviewing for this process. Because a lot of, and this is a whole other topic, but how do you get ready to be CEO? One of the things that we help or good candidates will then say to a board is, well, how are you going to evaluate me? Before I say yes to the job, let's make sure we're clear about that methodology. Because
Mhm.
if we're not clear about it, we're just creating friction for ourselves later on. And that's not what we want.
Clarity. Right on.
So maybe what we could do is I'll tell you a little bit like maybe a story or two, like why we got into this kind of work. What do you think?
I love a good story,
Yeah.
especially a good story where it all turns out well and credit unions win.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna tell you kind of the short version of it. So
Mhm.
I'm working with this CEO. This is about 10 years ago. And so he was a year or two into the job, seemingly high performing, at least he felt so. And he was like, hey, look, I'm not going to be CEO forever. He was kind of more advanced in age. And he says, I want to get this board to a level so that they can move and oversee this organization when I'm gone, right? When I transition out. And I'm like, that's great. So he was also like, and also I don't feel like I'm fairly compensated. I'm like, all right, well, let's take a look. So we go through this kind of body of work, and what we find out is his contract was set up in such a way that if the organization made X dollars in net income, he got a bonus, an incentive, and that's kind of makes sense. But what if you looked historically, the organization made just that amount of net income every single year for the last couple of years.
Uh-oh.
And what started to happen is that the board was like, well, we're meeting this dollar figure, so that must be good, but the assets were growing dramatically. So what was happening is net income seemed the same, but overall net worth and retained earnings was dramatically dropping. What he was doing was organizing around the wrong metric at the expense of the organization's overall financial footing. But no one was paying attention to it. So the other thing that started to kind of creep up then is like, all right, well, let's do a CEO evaluation. And he goes, now they want to hold me accountable? And I'm like, hey, hold on a second. You wanted to have this board implement some best practices so that they could, make sure that the next CEO, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, holding you accountable is a part of the process. He's like, well, what does this mean? So, anyways, it was an interesting conversation. So again, that was 10 years ago. That individual has since retired, which was great. They've got a new CEO in there. They're doing great. All these things now. But that was one instance that really kind of caught my attention.
Yeah.
Let me throw another one out there. I'll throw maybe two others. So one time, this organization, this CEO, as I found out, was getting paid, let's say, 75th to the 90th percentile, right?
Mm.
Which sounds great, right? Would you like to get paid 75th percentile and 90th percentile, Doug?
I just looked at the salary surveys, and depending on the size of the credit union, yes.
Yes, that I would like that as well. But here's what happened is that this organization was below median in performance in a number of KPIs. Now, the board didn't know that. The board thought that they were high performing. Why did they think that they were high performing?
Because that's what the
Because
CEO is telling them,
the
perhaps.
CEO said we're high performing. And so the board in this case didn't know how to do the research, understand the metrics, work through this conversation to be more in a, hey, CEO, if you want to get paid in this kind of way, here's the way to go about it, right? Like let's put some good kind of parameters in here. The other side of the coin is I've had some organizations, CEOs being paid the 25th percentile, and they're in the 75th, in a variety of factors too. And that doesn't seem also fair as well. So there's a number of these kinds of instances where we're like, why did they get that way? Like, what were their governance practices? What was written down, if anything, to allow those circumstances to come about? And so that's why we started into this process, this methodology.
So I've heard some confidential complaints, we'll call them, where a CEO would say to me, "Yeah, they pay me at the median, and they expect the top quartile." And I think there's some gray in the numbers because if you're only using your total comp and not including your executive benefits,
Right.
the present value of your total package, I find in my calculations, you put those two things together, it's 200% of
Hmm.
your comp package if you have a large executive benefits plan. So it's maybe a bigger number than you think, but this methodology that you're talking about, unpack that for us?
Well, yeah, so it's what I think you're speaking to is total rewards versus if we myopically focus on like a base
Hmm.
compensation number.
Hmm.
And so there's another organization. So we did a CEO search, and it concluded in January of this year, where, historically the base was kind of maybe below median, but the overall extra benefits and they had a 10% 401k, which is super generous, plus all these other things, did put it in a more competitive fashion. So I think you're right is to make sure you're looking at the whole picture of things.
Hmm.
So the total kind of methodology, maybe what we talk about is like a couple of common practices, because I bet some organizations, some CEOs that are listening to this is like, all right, Peter, those horror stories you said, we're not that scenario. That's not us. Common practices, though, are I would say there's no evaluation at all. Too often, organizations don't have any kind of mechanism from a leadership evaluation standpoint or a process to objectively determine an incentive and or bonus payout. That happens so often. I was at a conference, I don't know, it was a couple years ago, and I was walking by, I saw some clients, and I go, "Hey, how's it going?" And they're like, "Oh, they had beers, and they're like, oh, we just finished my performance evaluation. Haha, everything's good." And it was not, it was just a social conversation. It wasn't really a formalized kind of feedback. That CEO, which we knew, we had not really done a lot of work with, let's just say he got retired early.
So is there some correlation data there? Like I know that recent data I saw said that I think it's 55% of senior executives are operating with a contract, meaning basically half are not. And I know in my experience, it's common, and in large credit unions, it's common to not see a contract. Um, does that correlate with lack of formality in the rest of executive governance?
That's a fair question. I don't know if I've done that kind of one-to-one kind of analysis about it because when there is not a contract, usually the reason is, well, we haven't had one before and it's worked so far for us now, right? And we don't want to be
Hmm.
locked into something, et cetera, which is a super fair argument. N Almost every, I can't think of one in this moment, every CEO's placement that we do, they end up having an employment agreement, even if there wasn't one with the prior CEO. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect the organization. And frankly, we're trying to protect the CEO. Boards will go, well, what if we want to get rid of him or her because of whatever? It's like, great, let's just spell that out. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what lawyers love to do is enumerate to the nth degree all kinds of things.
Hmm.
Let's just spell it out. CEOs, you want to get protected if the board chair changes or change of direction or change of control. Great, let's just spell that out.
Yep.
It does help people not focus. It helps the CEO, I'll say, not focus on, well, how long am I going to be here for? It occupies too much of certain CEOs' attention.
Mean like they're waiting for for their next move up?
No, well, maybe. Yes, and additionally, hey, I they could let go of me at any point in time,
Right.
right? Especially if I don't have a deferred comp plan, right? So there's not like a carrot on there for me to stay. So I'm a free agent. That's the quote that a
Mhm.
lot of CEOs will say, I'm a free agent. And they could change their mind at any time. And so I had one CEO tell me after every board meeting, he texts his wife, "Hey, I still got a job." Now he wasn't like on the bubble or anything like that. High performer, good CEO, great leader, all those kinds of things. But it was just a joke of like, there's no protection one way or the other. I think that's an institutional risk too for succession planning, right? Because I have CEOs now, as you can imagine, that they tell me I'm a free agent or I don't have a SERP or I don't have these things. Peter, if you've got, or frankly, let's say they do, Peter, if you've got a challenge that's worthy that you think I would like, I'm willing to entertain it. It's like, okay. And there's no employment agreement.
Interesting. So you're saying the employment, it reminds me, I did one of these interviews with a recruiter, and one of the biggest quote I recall from that podcast was, "If they have executive benefits, if they had split dollar specifically, I can't move them," is what the recruiter said, and I assume that the just the economic cost, especially as people get older and you got to be able to insure them, becomes more and more difficult. But you're saying that there's another side, maybe a substantial side, in having that employment contract. The clarity that both the board and the executive have sort of protects both sides against short-term moves, right? Those are only maybe 3 years long, 5 years long.
Yeah, each one's a little unique, and that's a whole podcast and session in and of itself because what the employment agreement terms and conditions kind of allow for is, well, what are we after here? Short, long-term, medium, et cetera, and we can structure it a lot of different ways. So let me comment on what you said the other executive recruiter did. What I'll say is we're more executive search consultants, is the way that we look at it, and we are not necessarily we have recruited CEOs with very generous split dollar plans into other organizations. You just have to know how to do it. You got to
Well,
have the right expertise.
I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I got to know, how do you do it? How do you?
I'm gonna tell you that you need to talk with Tom Sivride over at ALM First at Exec Benz. That guy knows what he's doing, man. That guy knows what he's doing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. That's a whole podcast in and of itself, I think. And I'm not going to get over my skis because that's not my AO. That's my area of operation or expertise. That's what they do, right? But so here's a stat that you might like. I know you like stats. So I did some research, it's maybe about 2 years ago now, about the amount of transitions for CEOs and who took that spot. And it was about 90% of CEOs that came into the CEO position were not a sitting CEO prior to that role. So let me say it differently.
Yeah, I get it.
When a
Yeah,
CEO takes a job, when a CEO job gets filled, the
it's not by a
overwhelming
CEO.
majority of the
Yeah,
time is that it's not a prior CEO.
interesting. So when you're moving, you're not moving from the top job, you're moving from another job up to the top job.
And usually I would say it's because they're established or those things, they've got the good thing going. They also have the deferred comp plans in place too. So those
Mm.
I would say they do work. It's not impossible though.
Yeah, yeah.
So we talk about we were kind of started talking about this about like the CEO on the board and like works through this. I'll tell you that a primary reason why CEOs want to leave when it does occur is the board, the friction with the board. And I would say it's because it is too common that there is not the proper mechanism or process to extract and channel and focus board sentiment into useful, pragmatic dialogue.
Mm.
Say it differently, there's factions on the board, and then those things occur. And then the CEOs over here are trying to do their thing, and there's not a mechanism to put it all together and go, okay, let's make this conflict useful. Let's turn it into a generative force. So that's too often the situation. What also occurs is boards will go, well, what is the Doug? How much do you think we should give Susie for her incentive plan? Hey Jeff, how much do you think we should give him? Hey Maria, what do you think? And it's too wishy-washy, squishy. Or my favorite is, hey, how do you feel we did on our financial goals? So we're subjectively trying to quantify something that's already quantified objectively. That's
Hmm.
my favorite.
Hmm. We don't have a metric, a system to measure against that we then comp based on our system.
Or we say the goal is, we'll do simple math. The goal is 1% ROA, and I know that's not is 1% is not what it used to be, but let's just say 1% is the goal. And let's say we hit 99 basis points, and then someone subjectively goes, well, we didn't make it, right? And it's like, well, factually, I guess that's true, but the sentiment is really like we hit 99% of it, right? So let's just figure out a different math way to come up with that kind of thing. So another piece I'll say that kind of is common is there can be the if they do have an evaluation, it doesn't have, and this is a technical term, Doug, it doesn't have teeth. It doesn't have a compensatory impact,
Mm.
right? Like, hey, positive leadership evaluation, but it doesn't change the compensation number. Poor leadership evaluation, it doesn't change the compensation number. So if you're a CEO and you go, okay, like I want to be working through this. I want to be making more money. How do we work that? There's a number of components to talk through that.
Yeah, I know. Again, in the recent salary survey, I know I read that bonus comp is somewhere around 30% of total comp for larger credit unions is what I'm reading. And the top factors determining those bonus awards, number one, you might expect is earnings. And
Mhm.
number two is the one you just talked about, the board evaluation. So are you going to guide us through a methodology for how to build that?
Yeah. So what I would put in there is we then two off. Yes. So let me just kind of back up a little bit. Those salary surveys are great. What I think that they sometimes do is they query everyone. They're not queer. So what you then get is an amalgamation of common practices, which is different than what's best practice.
Right.
And I think the best practice starts with, well, we need to think through the evaluative components and what are they? So there's an evaluation. I think you mentioned it there. But then we need to go, well, let's have an incentive scorecard. You said the word bonus, and I'm just because I live in the comp world, I'm going to say no, incentive. Bonus is something different.
Ah, yes. Those little bits of grammar matter.
Well, they're different terms for different reasons because CEOs will get bonuses like, Doug, great job. You crushed it on that one thing. It was outside and above and beyond the duties, etc. We're going to give you X dollars, right? Which is a bonus. And you go, whoa, unexpected. Thank you very much. Incentive, an incentive scorecard or an incentive methodology is meant to objectively frame how the you will be held accountable to move and perform. And by held accountable, I don't mean like wag finger at held accountable. I mean, no, if you hit those goals, I'm going to hold you accountable, meaning I'm going to reward you. So accountability has like a conventional negative tone, and that's not the way that I use it. It's like, no, if hold me accountable to the performance that I'm actually doing. That's a complicated conversation because too often boards, and I know CEOs can identify with this, they'll tell me, hey, look, I'm not the expert, right? On all these things kind of move forward. What we like to do is serve as that intermediary, like that third party to say, well, let's talk about strategy. Almost every year when we bring on new clients into this process, we're working with seasoned vet CEOs. And as we're talking through the strategy, we were looking what they've been incentivized by the KPIs before. We'll say, well, what about this one? Your organization is trying to move this kind of needle, and maybe you're doing well in it or something, but you're not being rewarded by it. So why not? It's like, oh my God, I never even thought about that one. That every single year that happens, and I'm saying large, sophisticated organizations, mostly $1 billion and up is who we work with in this process, and we're just advancing their methodology every year.
So I want to turn that into a clear soundbite, a really clear takeaway. So what you're saying is you're looking at the comp structure of the senior executive and you're seeing if they're being comped on the key metrics, the key strategic metrics that a board has set out, and you're consistently finding they're not being comped on all of them. There's holes in the
The
structure.
most relevant KPIs are not always attended to and addressed, measured, and or rewarded.
The most relevant KPIs. Can you tell me
Yeah,
what those are?
strategically relevant KPIs. I'll give you an example. So over the last couple of years, and I know a lot of CEOs can identify with this, we've had some negative earnings in places that we didn't
Mhm.
necessarily think that we were going to because our investment portfolio and interest rates drastically dropping, all this. We had all these earnings sitting there that weren't realized, et cetera. So what a lot of organizations did is they said, hey, the right thing for the organization is we sell off these long duration investments.
Mm.
Take the loss. Take it across the chin and the gut. Take a hard punch in the face. But over the next 3 years, whatever, it's going to be net positive. That's the right thing for the organization. So what happens is, but I have to hit my ROA goal. Well, if I'm not going to hit my ROA goal, now we're in conflict. The strategy, what is required of the strategy, is now competing with the individual performance metrics. So we've got to, as we say, here's maybe the soundbite is the incentive scorecard methodology has to exactly align and complement with the strategy. They can't be separate. And too often they're separate. And there's for a variety of reasons.
So the incentive scorecard methodology. So we're gonna try to sort of optimize that. Are we gonna kind of lay out a framework for how a listener can implement that? Is that
Yeah, yes. Well, so DDJ Myers 800-574-88. No,
that's an okay answer, Peter.
yeah, no, that's a fair because it's a methodology it's one of the cool things, and this is for the CEOs is if you want the let me back up. What I really enjoy is when a board intimately understands this current strategic positioning in an organization and where it needs to go and can translate that into financial and operational performance.
That sounds like a board working perfectly, like leadership as it's supposed to be.
right? The governance is enabling, this is kind of a phrase I'll use is best practices. As a board will defend the strategy. Now, if you're going to defend something, Doug, it usually means you have a more intimate understanding of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is another channel for boards to become more intimately familiar with our current strategic position. Where are we? Where do we need to go? And then also we give them, and this is a cool kind of feature, is a dashboard to look at competitive metrics. Well, our peer group is 500 million and above, and we're 1.5 billion. It's like, well, there's a cajillion organizations that are in 500 million and above, and you're in so and so wherever organization. Those aren't your peer group. Let's tighten it up a little bit more. Let's look at peers and competitors because those are different populations as well. Have the board better understand where we perform well, where we don't, and where we need to go, and then all that related to peers and competitors as well. It just increases the conversation, right? Everyone just gets out like, yes, this is what we need. CEOs will then usually get, I'll say, more reasonable, more relevant KPI structures that are incentivizing the right behavior, incentivizing and rewarding, holding accountable the right behavior.
I like it. I like it. That's the alignment we want to drive the success of the organization. The bigger the organization, the more variable comp you tend to see. And my suspicion is the more strategically aligned the board is and the CEO uh, are, the more you get the behavior pattern that you're looking for.
You mentioned something earlier, Doug, is like 30% is pretty common incentive potential for CEOs, et cetera. And
I
it is a
said
pretty,
bonus, but that was wrong.
yeah, right. So, but that is a fairly common number. However, I can throw another variable on there and then blow that number up because it's totally different once you start slicing and dicing it differently. The most important piece, and maybe this is something else to think about for CEOs, is like, what is the board's compensation philosophy for the CEO position, and how aligned is that with the strategy? And you were saying an example earlier of like CEOs that say, hey, they want, top quartile performance, but they only want to pay bottom quartile, right? Well,
Median.
that's just good business too, right? From short-sighted, right? I want the
Yeah.
best for the cheapest, right? But that's not sustainable. That's another way to look at it. We hear that all the time, right? When we're doing some of our long-term CEO strategic succession planning with boards, or we're about to do a CEO searches, they'll be like, yeah, we want super innovative, bold. We want to make waves. We want to do all these things. And we want to pay the cheapest we possibly can. We go, oh, okay, that makes sense why you say that. Do you understand that that doesn't align though? That's not gonna, so we kind of work through that. We have organizations where the incentive potential is 100%.
Wow.
If I make 500,000 base salary, I can make 1 million total if I hit every single number, right? That's on there. Now, however, that is for a high performer, potential individual. What is also important for boards to go is, well, philosophically, how often should that CEO be getting all of that incentive potential, the 100% of that 100%? Probably not all the time. Or
Right.
otherwise, it's just guaranteed. Let's just load it in the salary. If you're another way to say that as CEO, if you're getting your full incentive potential all the time, the goals are probably not stretchy. The stretch goals are not stretchy, right? Let's just load it in the salary and just put the incentive potential at zero. All right, just making it easier. Save on a lot of administrative governance kind of work. Now, a lot of CEOs will be like, well, probably not, right? But we got to go, what is that? Do you want a higher base? The CEO's perspective is really important to extract, document, put in there. Because here's another example. I think it's about a year and a half ago. CEO was in the base salary of 75th percentile for their market and total cash in the 75th. And when it came down, no, I'm sorry, his base was in the median, sorry, and the total cash 75th. What he ended up with is, hey, I'd rather have a base salary that's higher and an incentive potential that maybe put total cash. So I can just have something a little more predictable because there's a lot of things changing in my life. There's a lot of things in the organization we're trying to change. I'm trying to move these things. We're not going to necessarily hit grandstanding numbers over the next couple of years. So, and the board is like, okay, yeah, I thought that makes sense. Like you might make less money, but you want that. We're fine to oblige with some of that.
I can see personally why somebody would want that. That's just that your 100% example just kind of blew my mind. I don't believe I've ever seen anyone beyond 40%. The 100% incentive comp, even as a potential, maybe I just haven't been told that, but I think you probably talk to a lot more CEOs than I do. But did the board get what they asked for? Did they
Yeah.
get they got the results they were looking for and put a comp system up that rewarded what they wanted?
Clear, objective. We mapped it out. Everyone was satisfied with it. And what's really cool is that, there's 4,500 credit unions. We can all run a little bit differently, right? There's always going to be an outlier. Someone's got to get paid in the 90th percentile. That's the way
Right,
math works, right?
right.
The other way to say that is someone's also getting paid in the 10th percentile. Someone is the lowest paid, right? Someone's the highest paid. There's a
Yeah.
lot of variations in there. What we like to do is give boards and CEOs like a structure and a forum to have that more robust conversation because frankly, it's pretty common practice that a board does not have a rigorous conversation about performance and comp in a structured, educated way. They may have a rigorous conversation about sentiment, which is different than data driven, right?
Hmm.
And that's in a framework, right? Decision-making process.
Yeah, my sense is that a lot of especially longtime board members and longtime executives get pretty personally close. And I can imagine that if you're hearing this podcast and you're one of those folks that hasn't had a contract ever or in decades, you're thinking, yeah, I'm not going to do that because the boat it's going just fine. The board, the organization's fine. The board is very happy. I'm reasonably happy with my compensation. But I imagine the something comes along and it's a change in the composition of your board or the need to start to identify your bench and develop that talent pool. And is that what causes them to call you and to start to formalize the processes that have been informal for decades?
And you're pretty close on all of that, Doug. And I'll give you an example. It's like, hey, look, we're doing well organizationally. Peter, everything you're saying sounds awesome. If I were 10 years younger, I would do it. But I'm close to retirement. Why should, quote unquote, right? Basically,
I
quote
bet you
unquote.
hear that all the time.
I hear it fairly often. And you know what I'm gonna say is like, I totally get it and I agree with you, like in some degree. But however, the impetus to do this now, prior to CEO transition, is to increase the sophistication of the governance practices or have the governance practices meet the potential of the organization where we need to go in the future before the new CEO comes on. I like to get this done 2 years out before CEO transitions. So we've worked out the kinks. They've
Oh,
worked
oh,
through
oh, oh.
this.
I wrote a piece on common errors that CEOs make in their retirement planning, and I was talking about things not to do in the years just before retirement, like core conversions,
Right.
just big messy things, large
I had
acquisitions.
a guy, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because I can't miss it, Doug. This CEO, 2 weeks before leaving the organization, signed the core conversion contract.
See you later.
He
Yeah.
was, and I was like, I told the board beforehand, hey, just here's our process for onboarding, just these contracts over this, don't long term, blah, blah, blah. And that one slipped through the cracks. Right. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, I
That's a
can't.
big one. That's a
I'm
big
glad that you're writing that, Doug. We're all on the same page as you. Nice job.
one.
So yeah, so sorry.
But maybe one to add to consider doing, and this is exclusive from this podcast discussion, is to formalize your governance, to formalize the get a, if there's not a contract, consider putting together a contract, making sure that the key performance indicators for the organization are part of the structure, and have that be part of your sort of 2 years away from your transition, to try to put those things in so the organization thrives when you're no longer there.
So I'm going to say you're right on all those things. And what we map out for boards is we say this CEO succession process starts 5 years prior and it really completes 1 year after. So too often, boards and CEOs will think about CEO succession for when the for like the first week of a CEO coming on board, but no, there's process we need to do at 6 months. We need to do an evaluation at 6 months, a pulse check. Where are we at, right? And then a more formal evaluation after 1 year. And we talk about in the incentive scorecard for that first year. That's a whole other conversation, which we don't have time for. But ironing out, well, what's an employment agreement look like? What's a compensation philosophy look like? What's the market paying these days? Have we been underpaying our CEO this whole time? Oh my gosh, we got to work through that. So that's a good conversation.
I'll be interested in your feedback on this idea. I was talking to a CEO the other day, and she had been with the organization 30 years, $200 million credit union. And they had in their comp package was, she had the salary and a bonus. I don't remember what percentage it was, 401k, no 457B, and no other executive benefits. And my question to her was, what is your ability to replace your income look like in retirement? And she hadn't done that math of knowing, okay, if you work for this credit union for 20 years or 30 years, can you leave here as an executive, as a rank and file employee, and get a reasonable replacement ratio that it takes to live, which is somewhere between 60 and 80%. Do you ever see that in a compensation discussion with a board, like a structure that is got that end point in mind, that we want to recruit you, we want to align you with our strategic outcomes, and then we want to make sure that you win when you leave? Do you ever see it end to end like that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we'll do, because as I mentioned earlier, we call ourselves strategic search consultants. And so it really is a moniker denoting of the consultative process end to end, which is different than a transaction, right? So I'm not just giving you a resume. So an example is when we do employment agreements and they're going to get a deferred comp plan inside of that, we will help boards navigate, whether it's with our partner company at AOM First Exec Ben or other partner companies that do executive benefits. We are the objective. I'm not getting paid from those things, right? I'm not help. So we can keep it clean in that kind of way. But we're the board's broker consultant to understand what that content means. What are the education? What are the figures out there? Is 60% reasonable? Is 80% too rich? Well, we got to layer in context for the individual. Where are they? Because I'm going to make the argument, Doug. I think the common practice is maybe outdated for some organizations. I'll give you an example. Younger-ish CEO started a year and a half ago. They put together a SERP for 20 years from now. Might as well be 100 years,
Yeah, that's too long. Yep.
right? Might as well be 100 years because you know what someone else can do? They can recruit that individual
Buy it
and hire,
out. Yeah.
right? So not even buy it out. Just I'm going to put in a different package for you, and I'll pay you in 3 years. So we're here to help, but that 20-year SERP, or let's be more clear, split dollar is a big price tag, right? And it's got big commissions assigned to it. I'm more thinking about, hey, the landscape's changing pretty rapidly. I want that person to stay here, focused, rewarded, 3, 5, 6, 7. I want them in that kind of time frame, and then we can iterate on that. We can layer on over time. That's a different approach, though. That's a different strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So something to think about for the CEOs out there.
There's a lot to think about. And
Yeah.
thank goodness we have the great servant leaders. Oh, hey, I'm out of focus. The great servant leaders we have in this credit union movement. It is a difficult job. It is one with never-ending change and AI and disruption of the employment pools and work from home. And it's not a small task that we ask of credit union leaders. And that's maybe one of the reasons that the compensation is substantial because the job is substantial, the expectations are substantial.
Yeah.
And as an industry, we need to make sure that the comp packages create a win for those families. When you leave the executive suite or the rank and file of a credit union, you need to leave in a way that provides you with a reasonable income for the rest of your life. And I think, in my analysis, that is the case the vast, vast majority of the time. It is rare for me to not see that. But when I do, it's
Yeah.
someone that has been in the position for decades. They were a teller and then they got in the executive suite and they stayed there for decades and they never kind of got marked to market on their comp. That's the only folks that I have ever seen that are way behind the eight ball. Peter, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's a high correlation there, I would say. And there's a causal piece too that I say is like boards getting educated from outside experts too, right? Going to conferences, doing that thing. What's your best practice? We got a conference that we're going to speak at is in January, and it's basically to help boards really
Oh,
share.
that was in Hawaii, Peter. I keep waiting for the invitation. I haven't gotten it.
No, that one I'm talking about is in Jamaica. I'm going to Hawaii and then Jamaica, actually, this in one
All right.
trip away from home. It's
That's actually too much, but
I'm gonna be honest, it's like the worst first world privileged problem to have to go from Hawaii to Jamaica
it's
and be
really far. Yeah.
well, it's far. I'm away from my family, all that kind of stuff, but but I am going to cool places. But anyways, so yes, I think there's, getting best practices out there and what's talent look like, what's the market for talent. I like how you said it. I'm going to add on there. People should be paid for the risk they're placing themselves into. Because taking a CEO job, huge amount of risk. If you don't do that job right, ooh, that is hard. That is hard to come back from it,
It is.
right? So you should take that. Someone's got to take that risk.
Mm-hmm. But that you need to be compensated for it. And the takeaway from this discussion with Peter Myers from DDJ is there's a system. There's a system that you need to have to put together to align the metrics of the organization, the strategic outcomes of the board with the compensation of the CEO, so that everybody wins together and everyone is chasing the same objectives and is paid on those objectives in a reasonable, measurable way.
Love it. Nice job. You should do this for a living.
Thank goodness I do not. Peter Myers, thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for helping this great credit union movement survive and thrive. Love to have you back again and again. I will look forward to next time. And
Sounds
until
good.
then, everyone in credit union land, you can find Peter in Hawaii or Jamaica.
Thanks, Doug.